To prove a mathematical theorem, you rely on axioms. To prove a physical law, you rely on observation and prior mechanics. But if you try to prove the absolute lowest foundation of logic itself, you run into a mechanical problem. Any proof requires you to already assume that foundation is true. In Book 4 of his Metaphysics, Aristotle takes on this exact problem. He calls it first philosophy, the search for the ultimate explanations of reality. Aristotle set a rigorous standard for scientific knowledge, or episteme. To know anything with certainty, the premises of your argument must be justified by prior, more secure evidence. But when searching for the absolute first principle of everything, justification creates a trap. If you prove premise A with premise B and prove premise B with premise A, you create circular reasoning. The alternative is an infinite regress. Every premise demands a prior premise, extending backward forever without hitting a solid foundation. Aristotle rejected both options. For knowledge to be possible, he argued, there must exist first principles, or archai. These are starting points that are inherently true and require no further proof to justify them. These archai are not guesses or arbitrary assumptions. They are the strict, necessary preconditions that make all subsequent reasoning mechanically possible. Pinpointing this first principle reveals the structural foundation of reality itself. Aristotle identifies one rule as the firmest and most secure of all first principles, the principle of non-contradiction. He defines it carefully. It is impossible for the same thing to belong and not to belong to the same thing at the same time and in the same respect. To belong and not belong means complete opposites cannot occupy the same state. A surface can be completely solid or completely empty, but not both. The constraint at the same time is vital. An apple can be green on Monday and red on Friday. It cannot be entirely green and entirely red at the exact same instant. The constraint in the same respect is equally necessary. An apple can be red on its skin and white in its flesh, but the exact same millimeter of skin cannot be red and not red. Aristotle treats this as an ontological law, a physical constraint on how matter and reality must be structured, which brings us back to the central paradox. Because the principle of non-contradiction is the first principle, using a standard deductive proof to defend it is inherently circular, and therefore invalid. Aristotle cannot prove the principle by building a foundation below it. He has to defend it by proving that removing it destroys the entire universe. To test this foundation, Aristotle confronts the intellectual challengers of his era. The first is Heraclitus, who argued that the universe exists in a state of constant contradictory flux. The second is Protagoras, who famously claimed that man is the measure of all things. These opponents share a specific weapon against objective truth, the argument from conflicting appearances. They claim that reality is entirely dictated by subjective human perception. Consider a breeze. To one person standing outside, the exact same wind feels cold. To another person, it feels hot. Protagoras concludes that both perceptions are perfectly true. Therefore, the wind is hot and cold simultaneously. This forces the claim that things are and are not at the exact same time. It is a direct violation of the principle of non-contradiction. If all subjective appearances are equally true, then objective reality ceases to exist. There is no independent truth for anyone to be wrong about. If the arguments of Protagoras and Heraclitus hold, the principle of non-contradiction is false. We are left with a universe defined entirely by chaotic, overlapping, contradictory states.
Aristotle is backed into a corner. He cannot use standard logic to defeat Protagoras without begging the question and committing a logical fallacy. Instead, he deploys the Hellenectic demonstration. This is a refutation designed to trap the opponent using their own necessary actions. Step 1 of the trap is a simple demand. Aristotle asks the opponent to say just one word that has a definite, specific meaning. The opponent doesn't need to agree to a full logical premise. They merely have to signify a single concept. For example, uttering the word man. By uttering man to mean a specific thing, like a two-footed animal, the opponent is intentionally drawing a line. They are excluding everything that is not man. The act of signifying one thing strictly requires separating it from its contradictory. This is the fatal irony for the opponent. They have just actively utilized the principle of non-contradiction in order to articulate their argument against the principle of non-contradiction. The opponent has only one escape route. They can claim their word means an infinite number of contradictory things at once. But if a word means everything, it means nothing. They have communicated nothing at all. The very act of meaningful speech inherently presupposes the principle of non-contradiction. Any linguistic attempt to deny it is instantly self-refuting. This leads to step 2 of the trap. If the opponent refuses to signify a definite thing, what happens to the physical world? Aristotle relies on a vital metaphysical distinction between a substance and an accident. Substance is the essential nature of a thing. An accident is a temporary, non-essential property, like color or location. Rejecting the principle of non-contradiction completely destroys the concept of substance. The universe is left constructed entirely of floating accidents. This yields an absurd world. It is a reality of overlapping properties, like pale or musical, with no actual subjects, like a human, to anchor them. Aristotle pushes this to its logical extreme. In a world without the principle of non-contradiction, a man is also a wall, and a man is simultaneously a warship. When contradictory states are allowed to merge, the physical boundaries of reality dissolve. You cannot differentiate a human being from a massive wooden ship. In this collapsed state, the theory of Anaxagoras is realized. All things are infinitely mixed together in an undifferentiated mass. Denying the principle of non-contradiction conceptually obliterates the very boundaries of physical matter. There is one final retreat for the skeptic. What if the opponent simply remains completely silent to avoid Aristotle's linguistic trap? Aristotle's final, undeniable refutation relies on action as metaphysics. Even a silent opponent must move through the physical world. He poses a scenario. The opponent is walking along a path toward a deep well or a sheer precipice. If the relativist truly believes the chasm is both a chasm and not a chasm, they would not alter their path. To a true relativist, falling into the well would be simultaneously good and not good. By intentionally stepping around the well, the opponent physically proves they differentiate reality from its contradictory. Aristotle delivers his final verdict on the relativist. A person who truly abandons the principle of non-contradiction cannot speak, think, or act with deliberate intention. Such a person is reduced to the mere status of a vegetable. The principle of non-contradiction is a transcendental necessity. Aristotle doesn't prove the principle by digging beneath it. He proves it by demonstrating that we are always already standing on it, just to argue, live, and exist.